welcome to today's episode of Daily Debrief, brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Swastika, and as we wrap up this week, let's get into the first story. Israeli missiles have targeted central Syria, killing 5 people, including a civilian, and ignited fires in farmlands in the area, Syrian state media has reported. The missiles were fired at the town of Masaf in the Hama countryside, the official news agency Sana said on Friday, adding that several missiles were shot down by Syrian air defenses. Now, to understand more what has been going on in this region, let's go over to our colleague Abdul. Abdul, thank you for joining us. Could you tell us some of the details that have emerged with this recent attack?
There are very limited details so far, and one of the basic thing is the Israeli, this was an airstrike. Several missiles were fired from the Mediterranean to the Hama countryside, in which 1 civilian and 4 Syrian soldiers have been killed. This was done again as is the usual practice, basically in the midnight, in the early morning or the late night period. And it has also caused injuries and destruction of some properties. So around 7 people have been injured and some civilian properties have been damaged. The Israeli claim, though they have never acknowledged that they have attacked, but the Israeli media and the international agencies, for example, the Syrian Observatory Mission in London, they have observed that the target was some Iranian base there, and it is one of those strikes which basically was in order to kind of quote-unquote destroy the threats, the possible threats to Israel. So this is the kind of things which we know. The other details are not yet there.
Yeah. Actually, this is not the first time that Israeli missiles have hit Syria. It's been an ongoing process in the last 10 years. But also that in the last 1 year itself, this is the 12th such attack. What are the reasons for these escalated aggressions?
Well, as you rightly pointed out, this is 12th such attack. All of these attacks which Israel has carried out, though, as I said before, they claim that this is against Hezbollah or in Iranian bases. And since Hezbollah and Iran are not quote-unquote in good terms with Israel, so their bases nearby, near to their border, is perceived threat. But in reality, this has nothing to do with Israeli security. It is basically an attempt to create a regional hegemony, which Israel is following for the very long time. Syrian government says that this is basically an Israeli attempt to kind of prolong the civil war or the war in Syria, which is going on for last 10 years, because these strikes basically weaken the Syrian war against the forces which are trying to basically fight against the Bashar al-Assad government. So this is that is what Syrian government's position is. So as I said before, all these strikes have been unprovoked. There has been no provocation from the Syrian side or from any other side. Israel in last 10 years, it is estimated that it has carried out hundreds of such strikes and scores of people have died. Within this year, more than a dozen people have died. There was an attack in April in which 4 soldiers were killed. Then there was an attack in February, again 3 soldiers were killed. The February attack led to the Iranian retaliating against it when they attacked Erbil, claiming that there is Israeli activity in Iraq. So all these things are primarily a sign that Israel is pursuing a strategy of regional hegemony, and Syria is their primary target because the weakening of the Syrian government is basically Israel thinks, because Syria is considered to be one of those Arab states who has stood against the Israeli hegemonic, basically the occupation of Palestine, and they basically want that regime, that government to kind of become weak, and these strikes are basically carried out for that particular purpose. One last thing. In most of these cases, Israel never acknowledges such strikes. because acknowledging would mean that it formally violates the international law. Though Syria has filed complaints, those come in international bodies like United Nations Security Council, no action has been taken because of the legal lack of clarity that whether such strikes are carried by Israelis. Yeah.
Well, thank you for those details. Stay with us, Abdul. We'll come back to you for another story. Now, in our second story, let's go over to India. Now, India has prohibited wheat exports that the world was counting on to alleviate supply constraints sparked by the war in Ukraine, saying that the nation's food security is under threat. Exports will still be allowed to countries that require wheat for food security needs and based on the requests of their governments. India's Directorate General of Foreign Trade said in a notification which is dated as May 13th. Now, all new shipments will be banned with immediate effect. To understand more about this, we're joined by V. Sridhar on what are the ramifications of this particular step that India has taken.
Welcome to our show, Daily Debrief, sir. Wanted to take the very first question on the story where India has decided to prohibit the export of wheat. What are the ramifications of India banning the export at this point in time internationally?
Uh, well, in the first place, deciding to enter the market to sell wheat was, I think, a completely wrong decision because we don't have the wheat to sell. I mean, that's the reality. We don't have enough wheat to sell in international market, first. And secondly, India is a marginal player in the global market for wheat. We are not a regular seller of wheat in the wheat market, global wheat market by any means. So we don't have any. I mean, it just seemed opportunistic of the Modi government to try and sell whatever wheat it could get its hands on, and that was obviously without any consideration to what would happen domestically because of that decision. And so they have gone back on that decision because that was the rational thing to do.
This entire food grain shortage in supply has begun with the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Now, how has the war in Ukraine created this imbalance in the wheat supply?
No, the war in Ukraine has not. It's not really correct to say that there has been a disruption of supplies.
Yeah.
There has been a disruption of supplies because of the Black Sea ports being blockaded, but even before the Ukraine war, the war in Ukraine started in November. I mean, it's important to stress this. In November, Russia, the biggest supplier of wheat in the global market, uh, actually imposed an export tax on wheat, a tax on exports of wheat. Why did it do that? Because it sensed that there were supplies were hardening. It was difficult to. I mean, so they sensed that, and which is why this predates the war in Ukraine. Supplies were getting tighter, and so the war in Ukraine only sort of worsened the situation dramatically. Of course, I mean it did have a huge impact.
Well, clearly, this entire shortage in the supply mechanism right now, world over, is not going to ebb away any. It's not going to go away anytime soon. How do you see this situation progressing? How do you see it coming about?
No, it's not just in India. We know that the 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 production of wheat in India has declined this year. Not very sharply, but not very by. I mean, it's about 5 million tons or so, and perhaps we would need to really assess how bad it is, but it is at least by that much. So that's India. But even in countries like Egypt, which is one of the largest purchasers of wheat, there have been severe shortages, and they are bidding the price up because they are desperately looking for wheat. Pakistan and many other countries around the world are facing severe shortages. So that's where it is heading. And in India, we are already, because you took the decision to export wheat, what has happened is that private trade has cornered much of the surplus that is available in the market, and especially because the government hasn't procured. Procurement of wheat has declined very sharply in the last in this current season. So there are not enough. There's not going to be enough wheat to sustain the public distribution system, as well as the package that the Modi government has been so loudly proclaiming.
Also, inflation has come in a big way in almost all the countries with these shortages that have come up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course. I mean, so one of the ways of countering that inflation would have been to step up public procurement. You know, and this is exactly the thing about the minimum support price, because if the government had intervened aggressively in the market to purchase wheat, use its state agencies to procure wheat in a much bigger way, then one, it would have offered a better price to farmers, and two, it would have sort of built a safety buffer to counter this inflationary threat. Now you've lost any leverage on to handle those situations.
Now, for our last story, let's go over to Morocco. For the last several years, teachers have been protesting regularly, demanding an end to the contractual system introduced by the government in 2016, which resulted in lesser pay and benefits and job insecurity for hundreds of thousands of teachers. The authorities have brought different kinds of charges in response to the persistent mobilizing by the teachers in the country in these last 4 years. 10 of the contractual teachers charged reportedly stood trial in a court in Moroccan capital Rabat on Tuesday and are awaiting sentence. Abdul, thank you for coming back. And if you could tell us more about this strike that is going on in Morocco and some of the demands of the striking teachers.
Well, the immediate reason for the strike is the action taken against some of their colleagues. The contractual teachers have been basically agitating for last many years for two basic demands: that their contract should be made permanent, and their wages should increase at par to the permanent teachers, along with the other social security benefits like pension and so on and so forth. But the government is not willing to do it for various reasons. One basic reason they often point out is that most of these teachers are not qualified enough to be made permanent. At this moment, which strike started on May 9th, the reason is some of the striking teachers, when they took action earlier, have been charged, and they have also found quote-unquote guilty. They have been convicted for 3 months and more than 3 months of imprisonment. So these contractual teachers are demanding that these convictions should be taken back. Those teachers should be released, and their agitation should be recognized because they have the right to strike and so on and so forth. So this is the basic issue at this moment.
Also, could you tell us why is the Moroccan government suppressing this strike in such a harsh manner?
See, in 2019, 3 years after they were all appointed, more than 200,000 contractual teachers were appointed in different parts of Morocco in order to implement the new education policy which the government has undertaken. After 3 years of agitation in 2019, there was a deal signed with did not only include the striking teachers, but other groups of government employees as well. It is called the New Social Deal. It was called the New Social Deal. According to the deal, the salaries were increased, some teachers were made permanent, and the government promised to give them other benefits as well. But the contractual teachers, which are the bulk of the teaching community in Morocco, were excluded, and they were not. Since they were not included, the grievances remained. So they were agitating for that particular demand, which are unfulfilled. Of course, the government is not ready to listen to them. As I said before, the government says that there is not enough resources for all the teachers to be given. Apart from that, the basic concern is it thinks that the most of the teachers who are on the contractual basis are not qualified enough. There are various media reports coming from Morocco which basically takes the government position that most of these teachers do not know the basics of teaching and so on and so forth. The question is, if they are not qualified enough, why were they appointed in the first place? So if they are appointed and they are serving for last more than 6 years now, of course the teachers are arguing that they have the right to get equal wages. If you see, just to give an example, the difference between the wages of contractual teachers and the permanent teachers, though on the paper it is same, but there is one technical difference. The permanent teachers are considered grade 10 and the contractual teachers are considered grade 9. And the difference between both of them is more than $150 per month. If the basic salary is $500, the $150 additional which the permanent teachers are getting becomes a huge amount. One more thing which basically the Moroccan government has taken, that whenever these contractual teachers are striking or doing some agitation, mobilization in support of their demands, they are fined more than $70 every time. It means a large part of their salaries, whatever salaries they are getting, is going into paying the fines for exercising their basic democratic demand, basic democratic right. And so this is the larger issue on which the striking going on in Morocco. Yeah.
Thank you for those details, Abdul. Well, that's all that we have for all of you today. Do join us next week in the same bulletin of ours. Do follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Like and subscribe us on our YouTube channel.